Autumn 1967, after the Six-Day War. Among the thousands who gathered to pay their last respects and accompany my beloved brother Avshalom to his final resting place, I, Tzila, his younger sister, stood as well. A 3-volley salute was fired, breaking the heavy silence, like the silence of the sands, which had covered Avshalom for 50 years. The state funeral on Mount Herzl drew to a close. The dignitaries and the people began to disperse in silence, along with the officers and soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces, the army Avshalom had dreamed of back in the days when no one believed that such a dream would ever come true. I am now at peace. When I was a girl, my mother told me with a smile, "Did you know? When Avshalom was born in the village of Gedera, he was so tiny, we had to dress him in clothes that belonged to your older sister Shoshana's doll." Then her face grew serious, and she continued, "No one believed that such a small boy would manage to survive, with deadly malaria and other incurable diseases going around." My big brother Avshalom and I had a special bond. All the young people in the surrounding villages admired him, and no wonder. He was a brave and fearless horseman who was not afraid to ride his horse Hedban alone through the countryside. He was well acquainted with our Arab neighbors and spoke their language like an Arab. Our father insisted on sending him to study at the Kutab, the school for Arab boys, and Avshalom was the best pupil there. When my brother Avshalom was still quite young, he understood that only with courage could we be free in the land of Israel, our homeland. Would you believe that when he was only 12 years old, he and other children from the surrounding villages established the Bearers of the Flag of Zion Society to drive the ruling Turks out of the country? I have no words to describe how well Avshalom could write. He wrote me many letters, and I kept them all. Whenever I got a letter from Avshalom, I was the happiest person on earth. Every letter, every note contained something wise, instructive, or entertaining. He never treated me like a little girl. Rather, he addressed me as a loyal ally and shared his thoughts and feelings with me. Once, as he lay delirious with fever in our home in Hadera, in a room with walls decorated with a marvelous hand-drawn picture of a chestnut tree, he wrote me a poem. "My brain is a boil like a pot on the flame. Malaria's the name of this holiday game. Only the devil can know for what sin I'm doomed to lie feverish, my head all a-spin. A mosquito that flies round the pallid lamplight looks as huge and as black as a bat in the night. The lamb on my quilt gives a pitying glance. On the wall near my bed the green chestnut leaves dance. My sister, my demon, my sister, my joy. Oh, why won't you write to this poor ailing boy? I don't trust the reports others give me about you. Please send me some news. I'm so sad here without you. I've no more strength to write as I lie ill at home. 1,000 hot kisses to you, Avshalom." Today, it's hard to believe that when Avshalom completed his elementary school studies, there wasn't a single high school in the whole country. Our father, Lulik, decided it would be unthinkable for Avshalom not to continue his studies. When he was only 15 years old, father sent him to Paris alone to study at the Alliance Israélite Universelle Teachers College. In Paris, too, Avshalom immediately stood out as an outstanding student. Avshalom was fond of Paris and French culture, but he was eager for action. As soon as his studies were over, he decided to come home and help to expel the Turks who ruled the land of Israel at the time. He was convinced that only the British, then the enemies of the Turks, could drive them out for good. World War I was raging, and the British army in Egypt had started moving toward the land of Israel. Father fiercely opposed Avshalom's ideas. They had non-stop arguments about them. When Avshalom came home from France, he joined the botanist Aharon Aronson from the village of Zichron Yaakov, helping him in his research and travels throughout the region, and among other things, in fighting the locust that plagued our crops. For a long time he attempted to convince Aharon of his ideas until he finally succeeded. Aharon agreed to head a spy ring, which would help the British to seize the land of Israel from the Turks. The spy ring was later known as Nili, an acronym for the Hebrew words of the biblical verse, "The glory of Israel shall not deceive." In those stormy and difficult times, only someone as brave as he could dare to imagine setting up a spy ring. After all, everyone knew that spies were immediately sentenced to death by hanging. Where did Avshalom find the courage and the willingness to risk death? In the winter of 1917, toward the end of World War I, Avshalom set out for the Sinai Desert, accompanied by his friend Yosef Lishansky. They aimed to cross the front lines where battles were still raging and reach the British headquarters in Egypt. Aharon's sister Sarah, who ran the spy ring in his absence, tried to convince Avshalom not to go on the mission. When she realized that he was determined to go, and she had no chance of convincing him to give up his plans, she gave him dates to sustain him on the long, dangerous journey. From that moment, a strange and mysterious series of events began. One day, when Aharon was in Egypt, he heard that a wounded Jew had come to the Egyptian town of Port Said. He was astonished to find out that the wounded man was Yosef Lishansky. He had not been informed that Avshalom and Yosef had set out for Egypt. Avshalom was hit by a bullet. Avshalom was captured by Bedouin robbers. Our knight, the fearless and impeccable knight, was shamefully murdered. What a disaster! Aharon wrote in his diary the story which he heard from Lishansky. Aharon decided to conceal the incident from his comrades. I imagine he feared that if Avshalom's death became known, the rumor would reach the Turks as well, and they would hasten to seize everyone in the ring. Perhaps he also feared that the evil tidings would discourage the other members of Nili and would drive them to desperation. Meanwhile, the ring sustained other blows. Two members of Nili, Yosef Lishansky and Naaman Belkind, Avshalom's cousin, were captured by the Turks and hanged in Damascus. Sarah was captured and committed suicide. A year after the war ended, Aharon was killed when his plane crashed into the English Channel. Our poor mother Fanny never had the chance to weep at Avshalom's grave. Having no tomb where we could mourn him, we established a monument in his memory not far from Hadera. Time passed, and many forgot my brother's story. His secret was buried with him in the desert sands. But now, after the Six-Day War, and 50 years after Avshalom's murder, the Sinai Desert was in Israeli hands, and one day, Shlomo Ben Elkana, an officer in the Israeli Defense Forces, brought the story up again, claiming that his connections with the Bedouins had enabled him to find out where Avshalom was buried. They told him that there was a grave on which a palm tree grew, and that it was known to the Bedouins as the Jew's grave. My heart skipped a beat when I heard the news, and yet I was assailed by doubt. Who could prove that the bones in the grave belonged to my brother, and not to some Bedouin? After all, at Aharon's request, the British had already searched for Avshalom and had found nothing. There was only one way to discover whether Shlomo Ben Elkana's discovery was real. I had to see it for myself. I looked at the skeleton, from which the soil and the roots of the palm tree which grew on the grave had been cleared away. Was this Avshalom's skeleton? Had Shlomo Ben Elkana succeeded in finding his grave? Had the Bedouin told the truth? As I stood there, agitated and trembling, the signs began, one after the other, to confirm the secret which the palm tree had concealed between its roots. The skeleton was the same height as Avshalom had been. It had a broken finger, the same one which had been fractured by a bullet when my brother's gun had inadvertently gone off. One tooth had an indentation, the same one I remembered Avshalom chipping on a nutshell. The gap between the skeleton's front teeth was exactly the same as the gap between my own, a trait which Avshalom and I had shared. There could be no doubt. This was my brother Avshalom. The Bedouins told Shlomo Ben Elkana that the Turkish policemen had divided Avshalom's clothes and gear among themselves. They had not touched the dates. According to Muslim tradition, the food of a dead man was unclean. The dates were buried with him. Avshalom had loved the land of Israel and adored its plants. So the land rewarded him with a magnificent palm tree, which guarded him and the secret of his burial for half a century.